You're listening to the Labor Notes Podcast, our weekly show on rank-and-file news and organizing tactics. I'm pod co-host Danielle Smith, a staff organizer at Labor Notes.
And I'm pod co-host Natasha Laney-Ullman, a staff writer at Labor Notes.
We're recording this on a Tuesday, days before this episode airs on Friday morning, October 24th. But we're pretty sure that the government shutdown that started at the beginning of this month is still going strong. Federal workers have found themselves on the front lines of the Trump administration's sledgehammer attacks on their agency's missions, staffing, and funding. They've been organizing across unions all year with the Federal Unionists Network, also known as the FUN.
Or my favorite, the FU Network. And these workers are now seizing this moment to explain very clearly what's at stake at a time when our opposition party leaders are sort of muddying the message by casting the shutdown merely as a weakness and Trump as its sole perpetrator. Our coworker, Jenny Brown, who's been reporting on FUN members' organizing efforts, wrote that federal workers have talked about this fight not just as a tug-of-war between branches of government or political parties, but as a showdown between the public and the billionaires. And we've got her back on the pod to talk with us today. Welcome back, Jenny.
Great to be back.
Great to have you here. You wrote this month about how federal workers are responding to this moment and about the letter signed by locals representing tens of thousands of them on the eve of the shutdown titled, "No Bad Budget in Our Name," which they sent to congressional Democratic leaders. One narrative emerging in mainstream coverage of this fight is about how the Democrats are holding out for extensions of subsidies to the Affordable Care Act, which expired this year. Combined with Medicare cuts, that means 15 million people will lose their health care. And even as big as that is, this fight is about so much more. Could you talk about how federal workers have framed this fight?
Yeah, it's very weird. Mainstream Democrats seem kind of largely afraid of their own power. They seem to be afraid to say, hey, we're using our leverage to hold the line for the American people. It's simplistic and it underestimates the public, in my opinion. They think people hate shutdowns, so they want to blame Trump for it, rather than saying, no, we refuse to rubber stamp healthcare cuts that could possibly kill 50,000 people a year. Now, Bernie and AOC have been very clear about this, but others have this muddy message that it's all Trump's fault, Trump could end it at any time, when the whole point is that this is a moment when the Democrats have a little bit of power to push back against these drastic cuts. And many unions and the AFL-CIO have been following the lead of mainstream Democrats, saying, hashtag stop the Trump shutdown. By contrast, members of the Federal Unionists Network, which is a network including many locals that have taken such a beating in the last 9 months, they're pointing out that a lot more is at stake than the ACA subsidies, though that would be a lot on its own. The problem is that unless Congress seizes back control of government spending decisions, as we've learned from the last few months, appropriated funds for any agency can be cut off by Trump unilaterally. Goodbye USAID, goodbye the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, goodbye the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, to name a few things that they've either 90% cut or 100% cut. So FUN points out that any congressional vote on funding means little without Congress actually reestablishing control over budget decisions. And here's how they put it in that no bad budget in our name letter you mentioned, which they sent to congressional Democrats before the vote. Quote, we are directly impacted when the government shuts down. Our members would no longer be able to work, get paid, or fulfill their mission of serving the American people. But we believe the most important thing is fighting against the centralization of executive power and for the long-term survival of the critical services that the federal government provides, even if that means allowing the government to temporarily shut down. So they were saying to the Democrats, first, don't sign on to the Republican plan because you want to help federal workers, right? In fact, fighting back is the only thing that will save our agencies, even if that means a shutdown. And second, any agreement by congressional Republicans means very little as long as the executive can continue to block funds, do mass layoffs, and basically commandeer agencies. They said, a government shutdown is never plan A, but we will willingly forego paychecks in the hopes of preserving the programs that we have devoted our lives to administering, unquote. So I think that's just a really profound thing for federal workers to be saying, and it really speaks to the emergency that they and we are in. I mean, I've heard federal workers say that the reality is that Trump and Project 2025 have been shutting down the government since January.
Yeah, seeing the Trump administration basically remake essential government institutions at will has, for me, really eroded this fantasy that elected officials lack power. So I guess I just don't really have the patience for Dems who want to act like they're constrained or powerless in this moment.
Yeah, and it's really great to see workers having such a clear analysis of, sort of the short term sacrifice of a fight versus what would be the long term sacrifices of just throwing in the towel, especially in light of attacks like these. And yeah, Jenny, can you actually give some more examples of how these attacks have been playing out?
Yeah, well, you'll recall how this administration's attack on workers started this year with Elon Musk and his so-called Department of Government Efficiency trying to push out thousands of probationary employees. And basically, they even ransacked sensitive data held by various government agencies. According to one whistleblower, the entire database of Social Security with all our Social Security numbers. Can you imagine how valuable that is on the black market? The Trump administration has been refusing to spend certain funds appropriated by Congress using a seldom used process called rescissions. And that means that he's basically cutting programs that Congress already approved, funded, and deemed necessary. So this has caused all kinds of chaos, not just for the workers, but for everyone. For example, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, was cut by 90%. It's a small agency that tests safety equipment, tracks cancer in firefighters, provides data to OSHA on what is safe levels of workplace exposure for certain chemicals, and many, many more things. So slashing NIOSH is basically also hampering OSHA's work and basically makes them blind. They're not the ones doing the research, they're just enforcing the laws. Then in July, Republicans passed Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill that would cut $1 trillion from Medicaid and allocate funding instead for both tax breaks for the wealthiest and also funding for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And now the Office of Management and Budget and its director, Russ Vought, have been trying to use the shutdown itself to fire more federal workers. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFG, and the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, AFSCME, sued, and a federal judge in California has since ordered the government to hit pause on those plans. But as we have seen with other court cases, that may be temporary. Federal workers are recognizing all of this as a pattern of broad-scale attacks on working people and a disturbing consolidation of executive power. And they're seeing this shutdown as a moment of leverage to mount a serious challenge. For instance, they want language in any agreement to end the shutdown that would actually prevent the Trump administration from bringing in more rescissions and refusing to spend funds that Congress has already approved. In the words of National Nurses United, which also has federal workers in it, they put out a statement saying that the goal here is to end the Trump administration's unprecedented power over government spending.
In the US political process, it seems like government shutdowns are almost this routine and ritualistic display between the two main political parties.
Yeah, one federal air safety worker I talked to said that most of his coworkers who have been through several government shutdowns are like, oh, it's the weather, here we are again, just doing our volunteer hours for the government.
Right, but there's also a few things that are different this time. All of those extraordinary attacks on workers and union busting that you just laid out, plus some other ridiculous elements, like government agency websites potentially violating the Hatch Act by blaming the shutdown on the quote-unquote radical left, which in 2025 is, according to them, the Democratic Party. The Hatch Act restricts federal employees from engaging in partisan political activity. If you've been doing some traveling over the past few weeks, maybe you've noticed a video playing on repeat at airports across the country, where Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, blames Democrats for the shutdown. Over a dozen airports have refused to show it, saying it too violates the Hatch Act. Not to mention, FBI agents and military service members are being paid as reported by the outlet Government Executive, which covers federal government news. The more relevant detail is how military troops are getting paid right now. Rather than have Congress vote on it, Trump directed the Pentagon to use leftover funds, once again asserting power over government spending, Politico reported. As Trump put it, we got the people that we want paid. What are some things that Federal Unionists Network members are doing so far?
Well, a big contingent from FUN came out to the No Kings rally in New York City, where I am, with a bunch of locals, like locals at the Environmental Protection Agency, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Army Corps of Engineers, Social Security, and also federal healthcare workers. Besides co-sponsoring No Kings, they've also been rallying at specific agencies that have been under attack, like VA hospitals or the EPA. In many cases, these rallies and press conferences have been called to support workers who have experienced retaliation, including getting fired, basically for whistleblowing on the dismantling of their agencies. And in a lot of places, they've been holding regular in-person get-togethers across agencies and across unions. I talked to an IRS worker in Kansas City who said they just get together weekly for a happy hour with other federal union folks and trade organizing ideas and inspiration. And then as the shutdown began, there has been a tremendous opportunity for federal workers to speak to the press. FUN has media trainings and encouragement for union members who may not have been out in front of the cameras very much. And this has been a chance for them to communicate that they are real people who care about their jobs serving and protecting the public, and to really explain what they do and how important it is, whether that's something like stopping lead and mercury contamination or enforcing laws against housing discrimination. It's been a great way to push against this sort of faceless bureaucrat image that's being pushed by the administration.
What are some of the other challenges that federal workers are up against now, beyond the shutdown, that Congress isn't really addressing in this shutdown fight or otherwise?
Yeah, well, the union busting is on another level. Like, the Trump administration has tried to declare that union contracts for almost all federal workers are basically just void. And they've stopped agencies from collecting union dues, trying to starve union treasuries. And this is basically the biggest act of union busting in U.S. history, with more than 100,000 workers losing partial or full protection, in addition to the over 10,000 workers that have been dismissed. So the administration claims that everyone from janitors to environmental regulators can have a union because they are, quote, determined to have as a primary function intelligence, counterintelligence, investigative, or national security work, unquote. So this is clearly bogus, right? It's supposed to apply to like CIA agents, and he's just extended it to everybody in the federal government. But there's also this glaring contradiction to claim that these workers are so important to national security that they can't have a union, but they're not too essential to terminate wholesale, right? The administration has inflicted drastic cuts on nearly every agency that they've claimed this about. So the American Federation of Government Employees and the National Treasury Employees Union, among others, have been suing all along, starting really in January. But appeals courts have allowed a lot of these contract cancellations to go forward, even as the cases make their way through the courts, and they'll make their way through the courts for years. But right now, people don't have a contract. At least the management is saying they don't have one. But it's not really as uniform as some news reports would make it seem. In some agencies, workers are still being paid for official time to do union business. Grievances are still being filed. Things that go through Washington, D.C., like dues deduction, have been stopped. But unions are still acting like unions in the workplace and have even been signing up workers both individually to get the dues coming in, but also new people who had never joined the union before. Federal work sites are open shop. So in other words, workers are not required to join the union. But in the face of these attacks, many have been newly joining as like, this is the only way that they're going to be able to have power, is join with their coworkers. And with new members joining, this is really an opportunity that FUN has seized to do trainings with federal union workers to get people to understand how to organize their workplace, which is one pillar of what FUN is doing. And then FUN is also trying to expose the actions of the administration, which the administration, I think, hopes that people won't know about, and really explain to the public what their jobs are, how important they are. And then once the public understands this, together with the unions, we can all join and reverse the tide of authoritarian attacks on public programs and workers. As FUN wrote to the Democrats, we ask that you refuse to support any budget that does not rightfully return the power of the purse to Congress and ensure any and all appropriated funds are spent on our critical public services.
Thanks for laying that out for us, Jenny. If you're a federal worker who wants to take action, you can reach out to the fund by going to federalunionists.net. And whether or not you're a federal worker, if you want to take action in your community, consider putting on a Labor Notes Fight Back School. Fight Back Schools are a gathering where you join together with workers around you to understand how federal assaults are affecting people in your region, identify the bosses and billionaires who benefit, assess the power you'll need to push back, and make plans to take action together. You can learn more at labornotes.org/fightback. If you're in Tuscaloosa, there's a Fight Back School planned for Saturday, November 1st. You can sign up at labornotes.org/events. And if you're not in Tuscaloosa, plan your own. We've got a planning guide at labornotes.org/fightback. And you can reach out to us with any questions at labornotes@labornotes.org. That's our episode. Rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode.
Join us on Monday, October 27th for our next Stewards Workshop on the topic of just cause. Our next Secrets of a Successful Organizer training series is in November. This is a core Labor Notes training on organizing skills, and we're doing it this time in 2 3-hour sessions on Saturdays, November 8th and 15th. You can sign up at labornotes.org/events.
The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Daniel Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by our coworker, Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.